It's a great pleasure today on Physio+10 to welcome Glen Robbins. He's got up very nice and early for us in the UK. Hi, Glen. Start the podcast off by asking the guests why it was they decided to study physio, but I think you've got a bit more of a story to that than the normal.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when I talk about this because I always did want to be a physio. I can talk about why.
Not a lumberjack.
Why that is, if you like, but well, I did end up sort of navigating around various professions. But when I was very young, I was on a school trip. I had an accident. I fell off a cliff face. It's about 65 foot, and had some quite bad injuries. So I went through physiotherapy for about, I don't know, 8 months, 9 months. So I always wanted to do physio since that experience, really. But I was always stronger in like English and history. I didn't do as well in sciences. So the kind of career advisors at the time put me off going on and doing science at A-level. So I ended up, when that was not an option, or at least I interpreted it that it was not an option, I went into an apprenticeship as a building surveyor. So I spent a couple of years doing that, realized that that wasn't really what I wanted to do, and took a break, and I went over to Australia, did the whole 1 year backpacking, worked on farms. I was picking tobacco, picking peppers. I was working on construction. I was hod carrying and doing all kinds of things, really, and just really gave me a bit more space and time to act under a physio, and then actually think, well, you know, why didn't I persevere with that? Just listening to advice that was not the right advice in hindsight. So I came back to the UK and I did an access course. I did biology, chemistry, psychology, and then applied for physiotherapy and was lucky enough to get accepted. And yeah, went back and retrained as a mature student, apparently at 21. So I don't know how mature I was at 21.
How, like, just thinking back on that, how did you feel being 21 and not being 18? Like, you were obviously mingling with younger new graduates straight out of high school. What was it like to be the old kid on the block, so to speak?
Well, I actually think it was good for me. I mean, first of all, getting all that experience at 18, 19, I was over in Oz. I was there for the Millennium celebrations. I worked in all different kinds of professions, a lot of really tough, physically demanding professions as well. So when I was studying, I just thought, this is great. You know, I was able to train at the gym. I was studying towards what I wanted to do, and I had that experience really of you know, knowing what getting up at 5, 6 in the morning and hod carrying all day was like. So in comparison, it was fairly easy in that sense. And the study side of it, the academic side of it, was tough, obviously, because it's quite demanding, especially after a break. But yeah, I mean, I was older than a lot of the guys that I lived with, but you know, at 18, 21, it's not a massive difference. So I didn't feel particularly out of place. And a few of my physio associates were older again. So there's one guy, he was almost 30. So, you know, we used to call him old man Wiggs, as if that's, you know, particularly old age, which at 21 I suppose it is. But yeah, it was fine. I had a great experience.
Yeah. And where do you fall in your family? Like, are you early, young, middle, kid? Where are you sort of sitting?
So I'm the youngest. Yeah, so I'm the youngest of 3 boys. My 2 brothers and in completely different professions. So my oldest brother he works for the Ministry of Defence, and my middle brother was a air conditioning engineer.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Mum or dad, were they in health?
No. So my mum was a finance officer. My dad was a black taxi driver in London. So right. Yeah, I was the first in the family to go into this industry. First in the family to actually go to university and pursue that side of things as well. So yeah, I think it was mainly my experience as a sort of 13, 14-year-old when I had that accident.
Yeah, really put an impression on you.
Me.
Yeah. So you would have done a 4-year course at that stage, University of Leeds, or
no? In the UK, it's a 3-year course. So the undergraduate physiotherapy program in England is 3 years, and then after that, you normally would go through a period of relative supervision. So you do your rotations in the hospital environment. Yeah, you are qualified at 3 years essentially, which is different to you guys, isn't it? I think it's a 4-year course.
Yeah, okay, and I didn't realise that. So it's still a 3-year degree.
Yeah, I think in Scotland it's 4, but
Okay.
in England it's 3. Yeah, I think in Wales it's 3 as well.
Okay. So do they call it a degree, or do they call it a diploma, just to be nitpicky out of interest?
Oh, it's a degree. Yeah, so it's a Bachelor of Science. It's yeah, so your undergraduate is a Bachelor of Science degree. Yeah, so most of the degrees here are 3 years in other fields. So we had to do 1,000 hours of clinical supervision during that time as well. So we're doing quite a lot of clinical placements as well in that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is the issue with physios that are trying to emigrate over to Oz. So I know there's a pathway the other way. I've worked with tons of Australian physios that come across and work here.
It's definitely the anti-convict migration, for sure.
Yeah, a bit of a passage it seemed at a certain point, especially from New Zealand as well. But it's much more difficult to go the other way. I think because of that discrepancy in the undergrad. So I think I was looking at emigrating at one point, but because of my master's, I think that kind of circumnavigates around it. But a lot of people have to sit exams, and they're quite costly.
Yes.
And they might not have worked in those areas for years as well. So I think you still have to sit like a respiratory exam, even if you've been working in MSK for 10 years or something. So
yeah, that's true.
There's a few issues when you go the other way, which is quite interesting.
So how did your career develop after you sort of first graduated from your undergrad stuff?
Yeah, again, I had quite an interesting first couple of years. So I have worked in gyms for many years. Like while I was training, I used to work at a uni gym, and I worked in gyms afterwards as well. And I was at a physio kind of strength and conditioning conference, and got talking to a guy that was over from Iceland. And I actually ended up doing the equivalent of a Zoom. It wasn't a Zoom back then, but a video interview with a clinic owner just outside of Reykjavik. And I ended up spending about 2 years in Iceland. So my first couple of proper years, really, I would say, were based over in Iceland, working for a guy called Gunnar Leifsson in a town called Selfoss, just on the outskirts of Reykjavik. So that was my training ground, if you like. It was an interesting experience, a little bit unorthodox because I didn't go straight into the hospital system, but brilliant, a great time. It was a fantastic experience. And my wife, well, she was my girlfriend then, but my wife now, she's a geologist by training. So, no better place in the world for her. She was over the moon when I landed that job. All the volcanoes and glaciers and stuff like that. It was a good fit. So she came along as well, and we both had a great couple of years there.
Right. So what's the biggest thing you remember from living in Iceland?
So again, for me, when I tell people about this, it's kind of, I've not come across anyone that's had a experience similar, because the guy that recruited me, and again, I do owe him a lot, really, because he runs a clinic in a very small town outside of Reykjavik. It's called Selfoss. And he's one of the most, to this day, he's one of the most passionate physios that I've come across. And when I went over there, because it was a small town, he actually struggled to get me a place to live. So I ended up moving into his house for a couple of months, and my wife had to finish off her notice period, so she wasn't joining me for a couple of months. And I had this kind of strange old school apprenticeship with him. So he'd cut his days short. He'd kept my days short. So I'd see about 6 patients, 7 patients a day. And then we'd spend hours like just going through physiotherapy training. It's incredibly intense, but rewarding. So he was so organized. He qualified in 81. So that's the year I was born. So he had a wealth of of knowledge and experience, and he kept all of his CPD like filed in meticulous records, and it scanned it all onto the computer and stuff like that. And he basically went through his entire career of learning and CPD and things that he'd gone through. So we'd spend three hours every day going through manual therapy techniques, going through different approaches. And then we'd go home, his wife would make us dinner. Yeah. And then we'd spend 2 hours having a beer and just discussing different physiotherapy things. And all of my cases, he'd go through each one of my cases with me and get me to develop my ideas. And again, like, Iceland is such a unique place in terms of how many sessions you get with your clients. So I used to get 25 sessions with everyone straight off the bat, and then you could get another 25 just by applying online. So up to 50 sessions with all my clients, which, you know, seems a bit excessive, but when you're just qualified, it was amazing. Like, I could see them 3 times a week. I could develop them, strength and conditioning. We had a fully equipped gym. We had amazing facilities. I was incredibly lucky. So at that stage in my career, to end up in that situation, I just feel really fortunate that I got to experience that, you know.
Which really answers the sort of the next leading question for a new graduate is like, did you have a mentor that guided you through those difficult first couple of years, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, 100% it was him. And yeah, I found him by doing that as well. I think that's really what inspired me to start giving back to people and helping and teaching where I could as well, because, you know, he went above and beyond there. I mean, obviously he wants a competent practitioner at his clinic, so it's in his own interest to make sure that you're good and you're progressing quickly. But, you know, moving you into your house, providing you with all your meals, giving you 3-4 hours of training every day, like, yeah, it's very unusual, to say the least. And you think, well, obviously getting something out of that as well. And yeah, that was kind of from an early stage. So actually the next year we recruited another new grad, and I was studying my master's at that time as well. I started doing my master's very quickly after graduating, and I was using my modules and reteaching them to the new grad. So even from that early stage, I started trying to feed back and give back a little bit. So he sort of instilled that in me as well, which was a positive, I would say.
Yeah. Why did you leave?
Why did I leave? Good question. So it was quite an easy decision in the end, because it was the 2007 financial crash. So Iceland were massively affected by that, and I went from earning incredibly good money to earning hardly anything when you're converting it. And because I was having to fund my masters in UK pounds, it just was unfeasible in the end. So
Wow.
we would have stayed there. We would have stayed there longer for sure.
So even though you had this sort of set, 25 visit type process, it was just simple. The conversion from Icelandic currency to UK pounds has killed it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a massive drop. I mean, when I first went out there, even seeing a modest amount of patients, I was earning more than like a experienced and skilled physio in the UK. So again, that was really positive. It meant I could fund my masters, and I was flying back every 3 weeks for different modules. Again, he was giving me all that freedom to have that study leave. But when it crashed massive. So I think they're currently halved or something like that in the conversion rate. And also you weren't allowed to take your money out of the country, so they locked the money down. So I'd saved tons, and we were sort of planning on paying for our wedding and deposit on a house with all the money that we'd saved out there, and then it was all suddenly frozen. And we came back to the UK, I think £200, which I don't know, what's that, $300-400.
Yeah.
So it was quite humbling to come back with that after all that work. Managed to get some of the cash back eventually, but yeah, I think there was about a 6-month period where we couldn't access our savings, couldn't get any money, and had to come back and locum, sort of the third day that I returned or something like that.
Yeah, it's pretty tough. So why did you decide so early to get into studying masters? What was the reason behind that? And what did you study?
Yeah, again, I suppose coming from my family with no academic sort of tradition, if you like. I suppose I had a little bit of kind of imposter syndrome and felt like I needed to, I don't know, study more, prove myself in some way to myself, really. And then I had the financial means by working out there to fund it. I knew it wasn't the traditional, although in my eyes, I got amazing CPD, more than you'd ever get elsewhere, but it wasn't the traditional route. So I wanted to make sure that I was also progressing myself professionally in a formal way that would be recognized if I came back to the UK. So yeah, a few reasons really. And the course I did was called Neuromuscular Physiotherapy, and it was at Hertfordshire Uni. And the reason I chose that was it's quite local to my family, and also it was a route that got you access to the Manipulation Association of Chartered Physios, which is now called the Musculoskeletal Association of Chartered Physios, and there's an equivalent in Australia. So yes, a specialised kind of group really in manual therapy and physio. So I wanted to do a course that gave me access to membership there as well.
Yeah. So what would you say was the main focus of that particular master's? Was it a 1-year master's?
It could have been if you were full-time. I was working, so it actually took me almost 5 years, which yeah, we can talk about. But yeah, so I did it over a period of time. Because I was so new when I started. Again, there was a lady called Mary Sexton. She was amazing on the course, so she advised me really well. So they wouldn't normally let someone start that early. So she said, "We'll let you start as long as you're getting good clinical experience, and we'll do it in a kind of strange order." So I did my research methods module first, which is a bit more kind of preparing you for your dissertation. And then I did my lower quadrant and I did my upper quadrant. And it was kind of a planned move really to spread it out a little bit, so that I was also building up some experience in the background as well. I went off and did a module at a different university as well. Went back to my undergraduate uni in Staffordshire at Keele and did a kind of Sarah Mottram and Mark Comerford module on movement kinetic control, because I wanted to add that aspect into it as well. So I did a module at another uni that they let me transfer across to Herts. So yeah, it was kind of planned to do it extended period. I think if I was doing it now, then taking a year out and just kind of bashing it out would maybe make more sense. But at that early stage in my career, I think spreading it over multiple years was probably a good strategy as well.
Yeah, a lot of people sort of say they prefer the long format course because you not only get that information, but you get to, under some degree of supervision, learn to incorporate it into the actual clinical practice. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Again, I think it depends on your stage of your career, right? So if there was people on my course that were 7, 8, 9, 10 years qualified, so they did it slightly quicker, and I think for them it's maybe fine to do that. And it depends on your circumstances as well. It's like I was single. I was with my wife, but we didn't have any kids, so there's that as well.
Makes it easier.
Trying to do it over 5 years if you had a newborn I think would be really tough. And I will say I started to fatigue a little bit by year 4. I started to run out of steam a little bit, so I would actually, in hindsight, have done it slightly quick. I had a year out between finishing all my practical modules and doing my dissertation. So in hindsight, I would have just cracked on and finished it then, because I had to come back and then do my dissertation. So yeah, I think there's pros and cons to both approaches. Cramming it into a year, well, first of all, they wouldn't let me do it, and secondly, it wouldn't have been appropriate for me at that point. I wouldn't have got as much out of it really for my development.
And with you're not studying at the moment, are you?
No, not currently. No. Yeah. I am considering doing some modules and stuff, but it's quite difficult here at the minute with the virus, So I do a lot of podcasts at the minute. That's kind of where I'm getting most of my CPD, like listening to them and participating in them. And when it's all a bit more normal, then I'm planning on doing an injectors course at Hert's Uni, and maybe a prescribers course as well at some point. So I'll definitely go back and study again. I think you always need to keep learning, but I've toyed with the idea of a PhD as well, but I've got 3 kids at the minute and a puppy and several clinics. So
it's a puppy that's the killer, mate. It's a puppy.
Yeah, she's new addition. That's only a week we've had her.
All right.
So yeah, she's hard work.
So what's your day look like now? Like, it's obviously clinically based. Are you able to treat with the virus? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, so I'm back to face-to-face appointments now, which is brilliant for me. So I, in a weird way, because we were locked down quite heavily to begin with, so I had to shut my clinic. In fact, one of them's still shut now in London, just because of the setup of it. It's got no ventilation. It's underground. It was always based on having access to a gym, which has been withheld now. So I'm still a clinic down, and yeah, I spent 3 months sort of just doing virtual appointments and teaching my kids school, homeschooling them, staying at home, not doing any training outside. It was tough, but it did actually make me recalibrate a little bit. So my work day now is more balanced than it's been in many years. So I take my kids to school every morning, and then I go and start. I see my first client at 9:30. Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm in clinic and I do reasonably long day, so I work till 7-8 p.m. And then Fridays is my gym session, so I go in a fully equipped commercial gym and do sort of end stage rehab with lower limb clients specifically. And yeah, Tuesday's a kind of admin / sponsored athlete day, so I go down to a professional mixed martial arts clinic club, and I see any profiles there, got any vehicles used, and I train there as well, and I do whatever admin needs doing, but that is what gets shelved initially, and then piles up, and then end up taking a whole day doing it. But yeah, so I've got quite a nice balanced day, and I make sure that I train every day. So I have a long lunch, I go out, I go to the gym, I do some weight training. So yeah, I see a lot of clients, but I also make sure that I'm home to put my kids to bed, read them a story. I take them to school every day. So it's much more balanced than it's been in many years. So that's one positive to come out of this whole pandemic for me.
And have you sort of made a decision to yourself that you want to keep that sort of balance in your life?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a short time that they're young, and my kids are 8, 6 and 9 months. So when I first opened my clinic, I missed out a lot on my eldest son's first couple of years. And yeah, I just think you just can't get that time back, and you have to have that balance. So I still see, 50 clients a week. So it's not like I'm shirking, but I am making sure that I'm spending that time with them in the morning and kind of reading to them and putting them to bed at night. And in a funny sort of way, my wife was always a bit more strict on getting them to bed earlier, but now that she's got the baby, she lets I put them to bed when I get in, which is a little bit later than might be ideal. So I put them to bed about 8:30. But again, for me, it means we get that time together. And if you compare it to, the continent, kids go to bed a little bit later anyway, so it's not quite so strict. So yeah, I'm just telling myself that we're adopting the kind of Spanish way,
The siesta. So as a physio, like clinically, what's your number one goal then?
I think for me, it's always to help my clients to achieve their goals. So that's always been what's drawn me to the profession, what's drawn me to my job, and what gives me my satisfaction, what gives me my kind of pleasure out of doing my role. So I think that's been something that I've always maintained a focus on, because quite often as your career develops, you get pushed into these roles where it's very easy to especially after you've done a master's or something like that, the natural progression here in the public health services, you become more kind of almost managerial or more specialized, and you end up triaging and just assessing, and then, you know, referring them on to other physios to actually do the treatment, or referring them on to other departments. And, you know, I love assessing clients, don't get me wrong. I love the kind of the clinical reasoning process of assessment, but my pleasure comes from them coming in and telling me they're back to their sport and they're enjoying what they're doing, and they're, you know, playing with their kids pain free or whatever. That's what gives me a kick. So I realized early on, I don't want to spend my days just assessing and never doing the hard yards and not getting any of the pleasure, you know. So but then some people, you know, they get the pleasure out of that, like finding what's wrong with someone where someone's maybe missed it or directing them more efficiently. So it's whatever works for you as an individual. But for me, I suppose it's a bit selfish. I get my buzz from them performing, competing, you know, getting back to whatever their sport or activity is.
Yeah. And thinking across your patients, what would you say is maybe the number one or the most common piece of advice that you seem to be giving people at the moment?
I think education is key, isn't it? So I think with all of my clients, that's probably developed a lot more over the last 5 years. It's really educating them on their condition, what kind of pain is acceptable with their training, with their exercise, with their work, with their life. I think, again, over the last few years, I've started to look at the person more as a whole. So what's going on around their pain? You know, have they got a new baby? You know, have they lost their job? Are they working from home when they never have before? And a lot of my clients now are still working from home the majority of the time, which is interesting. So they've gone through this whole journey of coming to me and saying, oh, it's great, you know, I get up later, I can do what I want, I sit in my pajamas and all this kind of stuff. Then a few months later, I've seen them develop to, oh, I hate it, you know, I need to get back to work, I feel totally isolated. So people are going through these kind of journeys over months and years, and this is such a strange, unique year, really. And I like to draw a lot of diagrams with them. So I think a lot of the time showing them that although in their mind they want their progress to be linear, a lot of the time it's more kind of up and down. Yeah. And as long as it's following that trajectory of improving, then that's okay as well. I bring out the envelope of function, and I start to draw out the envelope of function and telling them that, you know, you can move it up and down, and that you've injured at the minute, so it's come down a little bit, but with the appropriate management, we can push it up, and we can push it up further than it was pre-injury, and, you know, kind of showing them why they're maybe not capable of what they were capable prior, because that's something that you hear a lot, isn't it? I used to do this and I was fine, and now I do it, I get sore. So kind of trying to give them that kind of education as well. And I love the 80-20 rule.
Yeah.
So I use that a lot. I think it's called the Pareto principle, isn't it? I remember reading about this chap who was observing his garden and realized that 80% of the peas that he was growing came from 20% of the pods. And then he kind of extrapolated from that if you have a list of 10 things that you want to do, that you can normally get 80% of your kind of delivery out of just 2 of those tasks. And if you focus on those, you'll get maximum output. But what most of us tend to do is procrastinate around the other 8 and not really addressing the 2 most important. So I use that a lot with my clients. You know, like I had a lady last week, she came in, like not even 2 weeks after an ACL, and she was worrying about, you know, she wear high heels and her strength, and she's a professional athlete, so her fitness levels dropping. You know, she had all these worries that she wanted to try and address, but her leg was lacking like 20-30 degrees extension, and her gait was terrible. So we kind of narrowed it down, like for this period of time, we just focus on getting the leg straight as best we can and improving the way you're walking as best we can. So just kind of focusing our mind on that for the first phase, and then that will change, obviously. So I kind of take my own spin on it as well. And if I'm giving them advice, I say, look, follow the advice for 80% of the time, and then that gives you 20% leeway. Yeah. So especially if you're trying to get people to wear comfortable, supportive shoes all the time, if they've got like plantar fascia pain or something. And again, I had a lady last week. She was a dancer, plantar fascia pain, but she loves to walk barefoot. She loves to feel the grass under her feet barefoot, all this kind of stuff. And trying to encourage her to wear footwear a little bit more, but saying, look, I don't want you to stop doing that either. So just try and shift the balance so you're not spending 100% of the time barefoot, right?
You got to
So
think
I use it like
laterally,
that,
Glen.
and I think
Get her to buy a
exactly.
square meter of AstroTurf and put it under a desk, and then she's wiggle her feet on that. She's not loading it at all.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, see all of this, and I think with training, do your training consistently 80% of the time, and then actually it's more beneficial if you have 20% recovery.
Yeah.
With diet, if they're trying, part of their goal is to lose a few pounds, lose a few kilos as well, because it might help with their condition, then watch what you eat a little bit, be careful 80% of the time, and then have a nice meal, have a cheat meal, cheat day, whatever, 20%. So I kind of use that a lot with my clients, different ways. I'm not sure how accurate the 80-20 exactly is.
Yeah, I think it just takes you don't have to be perfect, and you're saying you're not sure about how accurate that is, but we found that with our sleep research is that even though we say the average person sleeps 30% supine, 60% side lying, and 10% prone, we actually found that those people that woke up with morning pain, stiffness, and bothersomeness, and then when they went through our sleep intervention program and they woke up without pain, stiffness, and bothersomeness, they still basically slept the same amount of time in prone. So it wasn't the prone aspect that was a key point for them. So I'll actually say to patients, look, I'm going to teach you something. I'd like you to take it on board because it's going to help you from what we know from our research. You don't have to, get annoyed or whip yourself because you're not waking up every time in the right position, because we know that the body is adaptable. It doesn't have to be perfect. As long as the majority of the time you're working towards this ideal sleep position, then you're going to wake up most times feeling okay. So I think the 80-20 rule, it's good. It gives them a goal, but it doesn't make it fastidious that you have to be perfect. And I think that sense of perfection in itself causes problems for a lot of things, be they athletes or just normal people as well.
Yeah, and I think if you are looking at someone's advice and they're saying, look, I want you to 100% of the time, I want you to have shoes on from when you wake up to when you go to bed, isn't easy to pull, and you're thinking in your head, yeah, I'm going to do that. So you're probably not going to comply with any of it, right? So it makes it more of a negotiation as well. So same with anything, isn't it? Same with diet, I'm not going to eat any sugar, and then you have a cookie or a donut on a Saturday night sitting with your family, and then a lot of people, because they broke that seal, then they're like, oh, that's that the diet's gone, and then they spend 4 days just eating whatever. Whereas if you kind of build that in,
Safety valve.
yeah, I think so. I think it helps with compliance. It helps with consistency.
Yeah.
And I think consistency of anything is key, isn't it? As long as you
I think that's a big one. So what's the hardest lesson that you've learned then as a physio?
As a physio, I think the hardest is early on when you realize that you can't help everyone. There's people that you're actually doing them a disservice if you keep bringing them back and treating them, and you need to refer them on, and you need to get them looked at, and especially with red flags and stuff like that. I think that I've found it hard to treat individuals that were in a different mindset as well when I first started. So in my head, I training's a massive part of my life. I need to train kind of 10, 12, 15 hours a week, and it's not the case for everyone. So early on, I was probably trying to put my mindset into everyone that I saw and everyone that I treated, and actually for some people, they just want to be able to walk the dog 20 minutes, and that's fine. And you're not going to convert everyone into going to the gym 5 times a week and really focusing on health to a greater extent. But yeah, I think that was probably the hardest lessons for me, was modifying my approach more, being more flexible with everyone that I see, and realizing that for some it's more appropriate to refer them elsewhere, albeit surgical, or more often now it's people that deal with more like chronic pain kind of conditions. So that's a skill set that I think is a speciality in itself, and most of my clients that I tend to gravitate towards and do well with are athletes of one form or another, recreational athletes. So kind of working out what your best outcomes are with certain groups and focusing on those, and then directing the others to places where they'll get a better standard of care for them.
I think that's an interesting observation, because I know when I was working in Canada, and I would move from practice to practice, not quite a locum, but moved a fair bit, or even within a bigger practice and different practitioners, and seeing they if they'd been there for 5 or 10 years, they had really developed their own clientele. They were still a physio, but you could see the type of person that they were attracting, whether it be a person they spent a lot of education with, or they were just a click and traction type physio, or a electrophysical therapist. You almost had to change the way you approached their patient load, because they had developed expectations around that particular practitioner. So I think it's necessary that we need to work out the type of person they are. But I also agree with what you said, that I think our profession has moved much more into that education space. We need to spend, I mean, when I was doing 15-minute appointments, and they went to 20-minute appointments, and now they've gone to half-hour appointments. And I just realized that that's because I need to spend a lot more time explaining to the person, or finding out where they're at, and then putting a template over that and saying, well, this is where you are, this is where we're going, and this is what you understand, this is what I need you to understand. And that just takes time. So I think for that reason, our profession has become a lot more educatory on top of interventionary.
Yeah, I heard someone say, I can't remember who it was now, that the first 5 years you're kind of learning the ropes. Yeah, so from 5 to 7 years you can become a skilled clinician, you know, in terms of your clinical reasoning, and your you know, you're picking up on diagnosis and red flags and all that kind of stuff. And then what separates a good clinician from a great clinician after that point is communication. And I think that really is true, you know. So it's amazing, some of the real simple tips for like first assessments as well that often get missed is just putting yourself in their shoes, you know. And again, a senior physio said to me, well, what do you think that the patient wants when they come for an initial assessment? So we're always very mindful of what we want, you know. We want to work out what the issue is, their load, how we can modify it, but what do you think they want? And it's, firstly, they want to know what's wrong with them, right? That's why they've come. So they're looking for a diagnosis. If you can give that or not is another question, isn't it? But we're hopefully giving them a working diagnosis. They want to know, is it serious? Because it's amazing how many people will have what we would classify as run-of-the-mill kind of MSK kind of symptom, but they've been on Google, they've been worrying, they've been, you know, stressing about these kind of rare cancers that they found online. And so, you know, is it serious? Is it going to need surgery? Is it something that's life-threatening? So reassuring them in that side of things. Again, they want to know, like, have you seen something similar before? And a lot of people don't necessarily make a point of communicating that, you know, because no one wants to be the first, right? If you go to surgery or something and the surgeon turns up and says, oh, I'm looking forward to this, I've never done one of these before, you're not going to be you know, particularly put at ease. So have you seen similar presentations? Have you had good results with similar presentations? How long does it normally take for a similar presentation to get to where they want to be? And then the last one, that you know, the elephant in the room, how much is it going to cost me? You know, how long am I going to have to come and see you for, and what's the cost going to be? So whenever I take on a new physio, I actually write out those, you know, 4 or 5 things and say, just starting point, make sure that everyone gets that information in their first session, because I think the vast majority of us would be wanting to get that at the bare minimum. And then as you build your rapport and as you develop your relationship with them, then make sure you're educating them fully on their condition, and, you know, especially on the pain side of things, and pain doesn't equal damage and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's sounds so basic, but a lot of time 1 or 2 of those points will be missed, you know. And it's, yeah, I think it's important we develop our communication once we're competent and safe practitioners.
Now, you developed a side hustle, education. I love it, obviously. very dear to my heart. Why did you decide to add an extra workload to 3 kids, a puppy, and 2 clinics?
Yeah, well, when I started it, I didn't have any kids, so I had a bit more time, I suppose, and it kind of took on a bit of a life of its own, if I'm honest. So I had started to specialize in runners. So I'd worked in a clinic in Fulham in London, and I'd started to team up with another therapist, and we were starting to really develop a running service. And I'm not a runner. I've never really been a runner. I do 5, 10K here and there. Funny enough, I started running tons more the last year because of lockdowns. But I noticed similarities with a lot of runners. So they very rarely did good strength and conditioning. I started to develop a kind of assessment process in terms of screening them, how they're moving, functional movement tests, looking at capacity testing, like what's their endurance like in their calf, in their glutes, and their glute med. And I started to develop this kind of runner's screen really, and looking at mobility, what's their big toe, ankle mobility like, hip mobility, you know. So it was a process that developed over quite a period of time, and I started to get good results with runners, and I started to get kind of recommendations from a variety of running clubs, and a big part of my list was starting to be filled with marathon runners, predominantly around certain times of the year. So I think there's something to this. It seems to be helping, and this hadn't even got into the whole running analysis side of things then. This was just looking at their training load, recovery, strength and conditioning, and movement screens. And I thought, well, it might be quite nice to do a 2-hour course on strength and conditioning for runners. And at this stage, I was working in St Albans alongside Benoit Matthew, and we were discussing, and he wanted to start getting into teaching at that point as well. And we said, well, why don't we put this into like a 2-hour kind of package? So I contacted a few of the running clubs that I was working with, and they were really receptive to it. So we started doing 2-hour evening courses, more for marketing really, just again educating them and letting them know that we're at this stage. I'd just opened my first clinic, so again I was using it as kind of marketing to let runners know that with service, because I enjoy treating runners, and I think, you know, we get good results with them. Then we thought, oh, maybe we should get more research, more info. So we thought, we've actually probably got a day worth of course here. So I contacted a local gym, because again, initially the thought process was, oh, we'll teach trainers, you know, like gym instructors and running coaches and stuff like that. So I contacted a manager of a local gym where I used to train and work. And he said, yeah, you know, come in, I'll give you the conference room. You can use it for free. You know, we'll open it up to the members and the trainers. And when we turned up, we were surprised. We got a good turnout. So we've got about 30 people, I think, but only about 2 of them were personal trainers. So the rest of them were Pilates instructors, strangely enough, and a couple of physios that were members that had heard about the course and kind of navigated their way in. And we worked out that to train trainers, like personal trainers, you have to be reps accredited. So they've got an equivalent CPD system in their own profession, and they won't spend money and go on courses if they don't get the points, basically. So we looked at registering the course with reps. It was very expensive, and we thought, you know, why don't we just teach physios? So we got in contact with Physio UK, which was a big nationwide CPD provider, and he liked the sound of the course. He said, I'll start pushing it. So we started doing day courses around the UK, and then again research and a lot of feedback, like, what about running analysis? So we upskilled on that side of it, and we added a second day. And again, it was like there was points in time where I was doing 3 weekends out of a month and going all around different parts of England and Scotland and Edinburgh, and, you know, like really kind of doing a whistle stop tour of the UK. And then we got our first abroad course, which I think was Dubai. So we went out to Dubai and then started doing the international circuit really. So it developed from there, went all around Europe, you know, Denmark and Belgium and places like that, and Holland. Australia, South Africa, Dubai. So yeah, really, really took off. So it was almost like an animal that developed a life of its own, and was taking up more and more and more and more of my time teaching. So again, the lockdown kind of put a stop on that and made me think more about it, and realized that as much as I love it, it was probably a little bit too much at that stage in terms of time away from home and things a lot of that nature as my life's developed and I've started having children and stuff. Having 5 weekends out of 6 where you're not around isn't conducive to a balanced life. So yeah, again, lockdown was probably positive for me in that sense as well.
Yeah. Have you found that in teaching it's changed or influenced the way that you treat your clients?
Yeah, I mean, one thing it has done is it's certainly changed the clients I get. So as I would classify myself as a lower limb specialist, but I do treat all presentations because I've got an MSK clinic and people can just walk in and book in with me and recommendations and stuff like that. But since I've been teaching on hips and runners, knee courses, I get people traveling from quite a way now for assessing of hips and lower limbs. So my list has slowly become more and more to that client group. So it's certainly changed the clients that I treat in terms of I see 80% lower limb now, and of course, like, you have to be researching to teach. So you're staying up to date with things. You're being a little bit more thoughtful, mindful. I tend to, you mentioned it earlier, actually, I tend to have longer sessions with certain client groups as well. So if someone's traveling a distance for me with a particularly the hips, actually, they can be particularly complex. Then I'll give them an hour, actually. So I do hour physio sessions with those groups. So it's changed that. Yeah, it's a positive for sure. And it's always good for speaking and dealing with consultants as well, surgeons. So I get a lot of specialist referrals from hip and knee surgeons now that I probably wouldn't have been getting if I wasn't teaching in that area as well.
And are they referrals like, please look, trying to avoid surgery, or these are post-surgery, we've failed, can you now have a look at it? How are they approaching your services?
Both, really. Yeah, both. So either let's try some conservative management, and I know this guy and he teaches in this area, so see him, or we've had this op, can you manage the rehab after? So a mixture of.
Yeah, you came out to Oz mostly a couple of years ago now and did some courses with us here. Apart from the red wine and the beaches, like, what is your link to Australia? Never worked that out.
Well, you can never ignore the red wine and the beaches, right? It's a good draw. I love Australia. So like I said, I spent a year there when I was 18, and then my wife was actually born there. So she was born in Canberra, and she spent a few years in Sydney before her family then emigrated to Hong Kong. But so she's got a dual citizenship. She's got an Australian passport. So at one point we were planning on relocating to Australia. I went through the whole process actually as a spousal visa. So we were just about to make the move when a family member became a little bit unwell, so we hung around for that, and then I opened my first clinic, which kind of made it more difficult. We had our first child, so yeah, it just kind of missed that window. But her sister has moved out there, so in Perth actually. So my sister-in-law, brother-in-law, my nieces are out there. So we've got family connections. I've got lots of friends in Australia as well, and I've got a very good friend of mine in Perth as well that's been there for 8-9 years. He's just had his first child out there as well, and the plan was to be out there for Christmas this year, but yeah, the world had other plans. So next Christmas, hopefully.
Well, the red wine's not going anywhere, that's for sure.
No, probably a surplus of it now, right? Without any of these tourists drinking it.
Yeah, there's certainly some vats full of red wine. Hey, in your career so far as a physio, what 3 things stand out to you?
That's a tough one to pick out 3. I'd say the biggest one for me was opening my own place. Like that was such an undertaking. At the time, I was working at 3 different clinics. I was dealing with a GP surgery in Rickmansworth. I was working at 2 private clinics in Hertfordshire, and my wife had just got pregnant, and I thought it's now or never. Like if I don't do it now, life's gonna make it way more difficult. So I thought, I'm gonna have to do it, but financially I had to keep working to fund it. And so then you're in the dilemma of, oh, should I just hire a room for an hourly rate? But when you look at scaling it up, it's not the best model. So I actually took a full-time unit straight off the bat with no clients and a waiting area that I was taking in and renting as well. And I worked so hard, like evenings, weekends, Saturdays, Sundays. I was dropping leaflets and all this kind of stuff, putting articles in newspapers, magazines. And again, I was just so fortunate that after about 5 or 6 months, I could stop working at the other places and focus fully on my clinic. And it's just nice to have the freedom to manage your list how you want, and to change those times like you mentioned. So increase your treatment time so that you can spend more time with your clients and attract the sort of clients that you do well with. So I developed the running clinics to bring in the runners. I weirdly, my two most common sports people that I see is runners and mixed martial artists, so like cage fighters. So it's kind of a strange mix, but there's a lot of similarities between the two, and I love treating both for those groups. And I've developed services that bring in both of those kind of clients. So yeah, that's definitely up there, I think, as the biggest benchmark in terms of me suddenly who I wanted to see and treating them in the way that I wanted to treat them. Teaching, obviously, teaching is part of and is a massive part of my clinical life. So especially the opportunities it gave me to travel. So I feel incredibly lucky that I've got to see Australia, South Africa, but all these kind of like lovely places, and teach at the same time. And on top of that, my goal is always to try and help and to try and maximize my clients achieving their goals. And if you can teach other therapists to do that, then you're getting a kind of wider effect, ideally, if you've done it well, at least. So that's always the goal there. And I think I've already mentioned it, but I think specializing in an area, so specializing in lower limb, specializing in runners, specializing in an aspect of physio that you enjoy and that you can put more of your energy into researching and developing, because you can't be a specialist at everything, right? So I think if you spend your whole career in an MSK clinic just treating everything that comes through the door and never really honing your skills to a specific area or a specific region or a specific client group even, then it's very easy to burn out. It's very easy to lose your mojo. So I think specializing in runners and cage fighters and lower limb complex hips, it keeps me happy, keeps me focused, and I hope I can deliver a good service in those areas.
That's a tough question in what you just said then, because I'm actually probably quite the reverse, in the sense that I'm in a small rural country town and I can't specialize. I have to see the total hip replacements. I have to see the guys that just come back from a prostatectomy. I have to see the headaches. I have to see the shearer that hurts his back every time he does a 200-day sheep run or something like that. So in a way, I can't. I wouldn't say it's a luxury of it, but I just try and have to provide a service because it's the only service available. I have to try and keep that diversity going. And in that sense, as a specialist in Musk, I find I'm quite different in the type of service that I provide because I can't really just go down. But I don't mind that. Like, it kind of matches my personality. I like have quite a variety, but it does get challenging at times where you sort of jumping from one special interest group to another, men's health to Musk, then to pediatrics, and then off to geriatrics and falls risk. It's just the way. I think that's why it's challenging when young graduates come to a small rural practice. They can't, every time they're looking up who's in next and what are they going to be assessing, and they got to do a quick review of what they're doing because there's just so much they have to keep up to date with on tap.
But again, I think that's probably great for a new grad in that sense, because you need that broad. You probably don't know what you're really interested in at that time as well. You need that broad experience. And again, coming back to that 80-20 rule, I think that 80% of the clients that walk through our doors, we should be able to treat, regardless of our speciality. So it's only those kind of 20% that might need a specialist input in a certain region. It's like, I've got a hand specialist at my clinic in Hemel. If I get a complex hand walking the door, there's no way, I'm just passing them on straight to her. I can treat, and I do. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. And don't get me wrong. Like, a lot of my clients that I've treated for knees or hips, they put their neck out. They want to see me because they know me, and that's the rapport that we have. And I see them, so I do. I see a wide range. And the flip side is, interestingly, I wouldn't want to spend my whole day just treating hips, for example. Yeah. So the hip clients that I get, the younger adult hips that I get, are the most challenging clients that I treat for a variety of reasons. They're normally they've sometimes been misdiagnosed or undiagnosed for a period. They've gone around the houses. I find there's quite a strong emotional component to it as well. If I had a day where I could do this, just see them exclusively, I think it would burn me out. It just, I like to see them. I love to see them because I feel like I've got a knowledge in that area that is, is decent. So I can often help manage their condition. But like, seeing them all day, every day, it would me out. It takes so much from me as a clinician to assess them, to take them on this, to manage them, to organize the investigation. So yeah, there's a flip side to that as well, right? So I say lower limb loosely, but in that it means knees, foot and ankle, hips, tendinopathies, runners, martial artists, and I still see upper limb and backs and necks as well. But it's almost, I think it's important to have an area that you research and develop on, more so. So for me, it's not, and if I see a paper that comes up on cervical spine or something, it might be interesting to breeze through it. But I spend most of my time reading on the areas that I teach in and the areas that interest me more. So lower limb, hip, knees, tendinopathies, running related papers, because there's such a finite period of time where you can research. So again, I think it's just more efficient to find a certain region and or it doesn't even have to be a region, certain sport even, or a certain group of clients, or and even if you're seeing people from other regions, other sports, like I've got pro footballers, but I'm not really into football. So we can't have the same conversations as I do with a runner or a martial artist, there's only so much you can develop, so like I say, 80% of what runs through the door is going to improve, with our input, and should follow a fairly steady route. I think 20% might need a little bit more, attention, specialization, skills, referrals on, unless you specialize. And then I would say a bigger percentage of mine require that because they're coming to seek me out. So it's it depends on your location. If you're in a farming town, then I mean, Selfoss, where I worked in Iceland, was a farming town, so I couldn't have done what I'm doing now there. It wouldn't have been possible. So I know what you mean with that, and that's one of my most fulfilling times of my life was working there. So yeah.
You mentioned the young hips that you were talking about earlier on. Were they challenging for you or tiring for you because of their age or the anatomical area, or I think you mentioned the mental overlay of their side of it? What was the hard thing or what is the hard thing for you?
I think it's all of it, all of the above. Yeah. So you don't tend to see the presentation in sedentary, inactive individuals. So straight away, they're normally very physically fit and active by nature, by design. So, they have tough goals. They want to get back to training, 5-6 times a week. They want to get back to playing high level sport. Often, certainly the ones I see, because they are referred to me by other physios for second opinions or by consultants for specialist input. They've been around the block quite a long time. So it's not unusual to see someone that's had 3 years of pain and it's just gradually worsening over that time or something along that nature. The anatomy, there's certain things in the anatomy, like if someone's got a FAI, for example, an impingement, and it's because of a bony a bony anomaly, really. It's a tough area because it's also a normal observation that we see in a lot of non-symptomatics, but they try and stretch out their pain and they're actually worsening it in that sense. So you have to unpick and sometimes they're not appropriate for physio. They need to go and have a review with a surgeon, and just no one's told them that. Often if they've had the surgery, their expectations aren't managed appropriately. So one of the big things about younger hips when they go for an arthroscopy is it's never going to be 100% for most cases. Yeah. So if you've got 8 out of 10 pain going into the surgery, you might end up with 1 or 2 niggle. So it's still a bonus, it's still a successful surgery in that sense, but it's never going to be 100%. And often they're not told that. So their expectation is they're going in for this surgery. It's just going to fix it. They shave the bone away. They'll be good to go. And then they're frustrated and angry at the 1 or 2 out of 10 pain that they're left with. When if they'd have been sort of informed of that prior, managed their experience at their patients better before, then that could be avoided. They're tough. They're tough. I mean,
you're almost dealing with
challenging
chronic pain,
and they're rewarding. Yeah, I think there's a crossover there for sure. Whereas when I look at ACLs, I often draw comparisons there because it's a similar kind of recovery period after the surgery. But with most ACLs, you can get them back to 100%. So there is that kind of positive, and they get managed from the offset. So they get diagnosed quicker. They get surgery quicker if that's appropriate, So it's a much smoother, slicker machine, and it's improving with hips. It's still not there yet. It's not caught up with the management of knees. So yeah, I mean, I see ACLs all day long, but hips are, I see them every day, but 1 or 2 a day for an hour is good. If I started having more than that, I think it would affect my ability to be at my best for them. So I do limit that somewhat.
If you could step back to your younger self, are there 3 pieces of advice that you would like to pass on to yourself, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, buy some cryptocurrency, buy some Bitcoin. No, I think the big one for me that took me probably longer than it should have to work out is the balance. So I'm 4 years of age now. I'm only just starting to get a good balance, I would say. And even then, you ask my wife that, she'd probably disagree that getting in at 8 o'clock's not particularly balanced. So I think making sure that you're trying to achieve some sense of balance in your life, if you're an MSK physio in particular, and to myself, like I was guilty of working too much. I was doing, there was times where I was doing sort of 70 hours a week, regular, 3 different clinics. I did every Saturday at a certain clinic for something like 6 years, apart from Christmas and all that. So, you know, I wish I could go back and say, you can have too much of a good thing, right? So balance it out a little bit. Make sure you've got energy for your home life, your sporting life, your, you know, all the other aspects of your life that make you a person, not just focusing on the physio side of it. I think for the first few years, I used to worry a lot. I don't know enough. I need to learn more. I need, you know, I think you realize at some point that you're always learning, that it's not a puzzle that you're suddenly going to complete. It's like, oh, I've just done that last course, and now because I've did those other 5, that's it. I've completed physio. You know, you're continually learning. So don't worry about that idea that you need to know more, because it will get easier, but it's never going to go completely. You do need to constantly learn. And then just when you think you've learned one area, the research changes and the whole mindset changes, and it all goes back to a point where you feel like you need to reskill on that. So I would say don't worry so much. And I think as well, the flip side to that is your skills are, any skill, not just physio skill, but your skills are perishable, aren't they? So you have to keep revisiting them. It's like anatomy is probably the easiest example. You know, we all knew our anatomy inside out when we were doing our undergrads and postgrads and stuff like that. But then if you're not constantly looking at that area, then it leaves, you know, it falls out of your mind. It's the same with anything, manual therapy. You know, if you suddenly jump on the school of thought, you're not going to do any manual therapy, then you're going to lose that skill, you know. So same with communication, isn't it? Same with exercise prescription. You know, I went for a period of time where I wasn't taking my clients in the gym because I was working at other private clinics. And then when I started taking clients in the gym again, there was a period of upskilling there because I hadn't done it for a while. So your skills are perishable. So make sure you're constantly revisiting, renewing, upskilling on the core fundamental skills of being a physio, you know, so assessing appropriately, communicating appropriately, manual therapy. I do manual therapy every day. I'm not, you know, ashamed to admit that. Exercise prescription, strength and conditioning, you know, these are all core skills that you need to constantly go back and top up. And yeah, I think the last bit of advice was finish your masters a year. Don't go off and do that year traveling, you know, because I actually got to a point, I was sitting in Bangkok. So we took a year out, me and my wife. We went around India and Nepal, and we went to like Malaysia and Bangkok and Thailand. And I was sitting in Bangkok, and I got an email from Mary Sexton, the lady that I mentioned earlier on the course, and she said, you know, you do realize if you don't submit your dissertation in the next year, you're going to run out of time. So then you'll just have a diploma, not a master's. And so we had to fly back to the UK basically fairly quickly so that I could start doing my dissertation. And that meant that I didn't get to go around Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, which we were planning to do in a motorbike with a sidecar. Would have been a great life experience. So that was me just not getting my head down and finishing it off in time, and then doing the year out after. So yeah, gives me somewhere to visit in the future, I suppose.
Yeah, well, you don't want to do it all. Hey, and looking forward, next 5 years, where do you see our profession heading?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tough one, because there's so many changes in the UK, especially. So one thing I did notice when I was traveling and teaching, just how different physio is in each country. So you almost have to look at your particular setup as unique to your country. So I know where I'd like to see it. I'd like to see it progress to the point where we're not as divisive in terms of pro manual therapy, anti manual therapy, pro exercise. I think we should develop a way where we can find the best and most evidence-based ways to incorporate all of those aspects in a way that's most beneficial for the clients. I'd like to see us develop more because again, this is something that goes back to when I was in Iceland. The view on what physio is in Scandinavia is very different to what it is in the UK. So physios are viewed on as a tool to promote a healthier lifestyle to your clients, not just fix their ankle that they've gone over on, or not just fix their tennis elbow that they've got from doing DIY. So if you get a client in that's injured and they're a little bit overweight, high blood pressure, not training, diabetic, whatever, then that's an opportunity for you to advise them on not just their condition, but a healthy lifestyle in general. And those 25 sessions that I mentioned meant that I could say, why don't we just get you in the gym and start doing a bit of exercise? So you'd kind of use kid gloves really to introduce them to a exercise environment. And I would say more often than not, the majority of them would keep going with exercise as a part of their life after you'd finished treating them for their condition. So that was amazing to me. You think I've had a massive impact on someone's life. I've maybe reduced their risk factors of heart disease or, diabetes or, these kind of big hitters that are problems in the Western world, particularly. And I'd love to see that happen here in the UK. I'd love to see physio adopt more holistic kind of approach and actually start giving people more sessions rather than always trying to cut them to less and less with a view to impacting their life rather than just a condition. So it tends to get pigeonholed here into, okay, they've got a shoulder problem, you've got 4 sessions, treat their shoulder problem, discharge them if they're over 50% better. It's not very satisfying for a clinician's point of view. And to make the most out of that, you probably shouldn't use manual therapy because you're not going to have an effect in that time. You should spread your sessions out. So you might go 4 weeks in between seeing them. So you're not getting the same kind of rapport, the same kind of relationship. And you're not going to influence anything outside of that problem, really. You're not going to change their lifestyle in that time. So that's what I'd love to see. That'd be a dream of mine, is that suddenly there was a massive investment in physio and they were looked on as these facilitators of health rather than just treating pain as it arises. It's more of a sickness model, isn't it? I'd like to see it change.
I was just thinking it's almost like, I guess here in Australia, we do have that model. We have the opportunity to provide a holistic service and we can touch upon these other health outcomes, which basically we're saying treat the person, don't treat the problem, which is what you sort of started by saying right at the first point. Was one of the things you realized as a physio, going from a new grad to a more experienced physio, was that you need to understand the person before you can actually treat the problem. And I guess in Australia, we have that capacity where people can fund themselves. We don't have many institutions that are third-party payers, but generally people are happy to be aware of their overall health and how that their individual condition is influenced by that. So it sounds like you've almost gone back to that old medical model of here's a script, 4 sessions or 4 weeks of this tablet and off you go. And they're not really looking at the person, they're just looking at the problem. And so often the person is going to influence the problem and they're really missing the whole bigger picture.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the physios themselves are doing the best they can in that scenario. So they would be looking at the person and trying to do what they can in that time. But I was having a discussion on a podcast the other week where we were talking about ACLs for us, and the comment was made, well, you're better off to have 4 sessions with a really great physio than you are to have 25 with a like average physio. And I didn't make the comment at the time, but I thought I don't agree with that. I think like if you've got 25 sessions over an extended period of time in a 9-month rehab, you're going to get a better outcome than someone who just spends 4 times. And that's not the case here. You do get obviously more sessions for an ACL, but I thought that was an interesting observation from
you disagree with
from a surgeon. Yeah, because I think there's and listen, I'm a private physio, so I don't see any public health clients anymore. So I do adopt that model that I just was discussing in terms of I take my clients in the gym. I try and educate them in all of these areas, and I spend more time with them. So I don't limit their sessions, and some physios might say, oh, you're over treating them, because I might spend 10, 12, 15 sessions with a client, but I'm trying to make an impact in the rest of their life, so I'm sure you can do that to a certain extent around their condition. But if you're limited with 4 half hours, if you can be the best physio in the world, but you're going to struggle to get the same impact as, like a decent physio that spends longer and over a prolonged period of time and just builds that rapport, like a lot of the time physios won't even remember the name, of the person that they've seen, and they've given them all the right advice and given them all the right management, but a year down the line, they've not really even remembered the person. So yeah, it's interesting. And yeah, we do have private and public health, but there's quite a drastic difference in, who's got access to that, because it's quite expensive. It's not cheap to come and see someone like myself in a private clinic. So there is a cost side to it as well, and sometimes I feel bad about that often the ones that are willing to invest in their health in that way are doing a lot of the right stuff anyway. They're also mindful of their diet, and they're mindful of their, training, and probably the ones that need more input the most haven't got the access to get it, so that's an issue as well.
Yeah. Hey Glenn, thanks very much for joining us on Physio+10. I really enjoyed those 3 pieces of advice, and particularly that one about don't worry, because the puzzle's never solved. It's always an ongoing process. And I think for new grads and recent grads, that's a good one to realize that, even experienced physios are semi-worried about not thinking like they know enough. And so it's not a new thing that you're going to have it, which is a bit of a motivator. But I love that sort of thought, like there's not a piece you just finishing that 5,000 jigsaw puzzle and pop it and you go, right, I'm done. It's a good way to look at it. Yeah. So thanks very much for that. And thanks very much for joining us today.
No, brilliant. Thanks for having me.